Welcome, everyone, to the Contact Center Perspectives podcast. I'm Steve McDonald, your host. And today we've got a really interesting topic and guest, Craig Stoss. Now, Craig, you've been in the CX industry for over 25 years. I think you've actually traveled in 30 plus different countries. You might win the award for the most traveled CX consultant in the industry. You work with many different brands. You are uniquely qualified after working in like the BPO space, e-commerce space, working with name brands all over the world. We're going to talk today about falling behind on the latest CX tech stack because we know as CX leaders, just in every industry, technology, data, analytics, decision making, AI, all these things come together in a confluence that we need to make sure that we're in control of. And it can kind of be scary sometimes, the idea of a tech stack and managing that and the influence of AI and the analytic tools that are needed on top of all that. So you're going to help us demystify all that if we could. But before we start, if you wouldn't mind, just expand a little bit on the light introduction that I just gave right now.
Thank you very much, Steve. I'm really happy to be here. I grew up in a small community, late 80s, 90s, when the internet was just becoming a thing and computers weren't even in classrooms. Certainly cell phones didn't exist. I was really lucky at a young age that my one teacher happened to have a Commodore 64 in the back of his classroom. He allowed people to play with it. So I got into tech really early in my life. And then that translated into some really early customer facing careers before customer experience was really a thing. I was customer facing. I taught senior citizens how to access government forums on the internet. I taught summer computer camps for children. Again, very different type of customer experience there. And after I got a computer science degree, a software engineering degree, I moved into support. I loved people and I wanted to be able to see how I could combine technology and people. It was a fascinating thing. Again, in the late 90s, early 2000s, that was pretty new. It was a new concept of bringing in this idea of technical support. Nowadays, we take it for granted in industries, $1 trillion of TAM out there for this type of stuff. And then through a series of events, I got into some consultancy and started working with, as you said, big international brands, companies like Honeywell, NCR, HSBC Bank. I got to do a lot of travel with them to meet their different offices and talk about their use cases and different capacities. This was mainly on a software and implementation standpoint. And that's where I gained my love of tools and process. When I got the chance to lead my first support team, I really came in with this idea that humans are best when the tools they use are set to augment them and help them become more efficient. And that's always been my philosophy. And honestly, I couldn't have imagined where AI and certain newer technologies, machine learning from 5 years ago, and now obviously with our LLMs and Gen AI are coming up, which we're going to talk a lot about in this topic. That love of tools has done nothing but just expand because I think we're now in an age of customer experience where these tools can start to be a little bit more impacting the percentages of impact to productivity, to customer experience and customer satisfaction is much greater than it was maybe with earlier types of technology we use. So I'm just really excited to talk about this topic and see where this future is going to take us.
Craig, if you wouldn't mind setting us on a level playing field, we work in a very technologically complex world these days. So, how do we understand what we need to know in the CX space? And then, how do we start to apply it? What are some of the fundamentals that we just have to have a grasp on to be successful today?
That is the fundamental question. And I think if I had the real answer to that, we could start a company around it. My view on customer experience and where every customer needs to start, where every company needs to start is with the value they provide. I think that value is the number one thing we should focus on customer experience. And wherever that the customer wants value from you, you should be able to figure out what that value is and how to deliver that as frictionless as possible. And so if we take a very complex thing and simplify it down, let's start with the basics. When someone first comes to your website, why are they there? What are the dozen, 25, 100 reasons that someone comes to your website? In e-commerce, it might be to find your store hours. In some software companies, it might be to find the pricing of your product or maybe a demo of your product. Maybe it's to find how to contact you if you're a large enterprise company or latest interest rates if you're in fintech, something like that. There's something that your customers want from you. So how do you get that to them fast and efficiently? let's start right there and then say, okay, now how can technology help me provide that? And that could be through a conversational AI bot. That could be simply through really useful widgets or a better menu navigation on your website. That's a technology in and of itself. There are tons of ways to provide that. Maybe it's video content. So maybe you have to have a video tool or a video library for your product. With the physical model, maybe that's AR technologies. I know when I worked at Shopify, they released this really cool product where you could scan a product and then using augmented reality, you could put it into your house. So it's, I want to buy a night table, bedside table. I can scan it. It gives me the dimensions. And then using this app, I could augment reality and put this bedside table beside my bed and see how tall it was compared to the bed, see how far away it would have to be from the register if you have an AC vent register or something there, or the window. And that was really useful. What a neat way. I recently bought glasses online and they took a scan of my face and put the glasses on my face using augmented reality. What a really cool way to use technology to show what glasses would look like on someone's face remotely. That's the type of thing that I think companies need to start thinking about is what value am I here to provide and what's the easiest way to do that and what technology could help me provide.
What's interesting is there's two camps in value. The value you're talking about here is value for the customer. And how do we increase that experience? And how do we get them more efficiently what they want in really cool technological ways that they haven't even thought of yet? There's also value on the analytics side. There's value internally into the company. So there's value to product development and engineering. There's value from being on the front line to the sales organization, the marketing. So there's technological tools for assessing and providing value as well. And that then makes it a little bit overwhelming. But when we think about this in terms of demystifying this, are there some fundamentals that are at least things that we need to be thinking about? Or what is the problem with today's tech stack? Maybe starting there in terms of what's the challenge that we need to be thinking about as we're thinking about building out our tech stack and providing the front and the back end value that you're talking about?
Yeah, great question. The good thing with the AI revolution that we're seeing right now is that these tools make it easier to do a lot of what I've just talked about. For example, you mentioned Insights Analytics AI. There are tools, one of the companies I consult with called The Loops is an AI insights and analytics tool. And what they do is they connect your entire tech stack. So they connect to your CRM, that your help desk, to your product usage tool. They connect into your log files. They can connect into your sales calls. They can connect anywhere in your tech stack across the entire life cycle of your customers and start to be able to understand patterns, trends, common feedback if you connect to your social media accounts, things like that, and then be able to assign it information value as far as money. Is this feedback costing you money? Is this type of support ticket costing you money? And you can start to be very surgical about what I want to do. This widget is costing us $200,000 a year in support costs. If all we did is change that widget to be more user friendly, we would save that much money. How impacting is that to a business to be able to say, this is costing us here, even though it might be saving us over here, which is greater? And if it costs less to fix than it is to support, that's a win for the business. And so the biggest consideration change I would say in the market today is that we used to go to market for tools that solved some specific problem. So I'll use telephony as an example. We would go buy a telephone system, a VoIP system like your Ring Centrals, your Air Calls, your dial pads. Very easy to go and buy that. You could probably buy any one of them and still get most of the features you want, 90+% of the features you want. Obviously, they are differentiation. That's how the market works. That's how competition works. Pricing is different. The models they do, the UI is different. Those are the value advantage of doing an RFP and investigating. The new model is something very different. It's not about, I want to go to market for a conversational AI tool because two tools that could be labeled as conversational AI could solve their problems in very different ways. And the model of AI in the background have to be tuned to certain things. So you might have a model that is for e-commerce specifically or for fintech specifically. So each tool is not identical, even though they might fit under the same category of tool. And so there's a big shift coming in the way we buy software. And I would argue that shift is up to the companies to be able to market their software better. So as opposed to being very generic, like we will boost your customer experience or we will deflect 70% of your tickets, you have to be very precise in what tickets are you deflecting? How are you going to boost customer experience? Because that is what's actually going to end up providing the benefit, the ROI to the companies that you sell to. And those are the biggest things I think we need to watch out for in the industry right now.
So you right there, you've defined why it's more complex. Before, it was much more of a hardware decision on what we're buying. Today, it's much more of the capabilities as product feature hardware has become more of a commodity. And I don't mean anything against any of those companies, but it's hard to have product feature superiority. What's defining the tech stack of today is the software and the AI that runs behind it.
And I think it also goes to the type of experience you want to provide. When you bought these point tools, telephone systems, help desks, any tool that runs a particular part of your business, the idea was is that you were just putting a tool in place to help you get some metrics out of it. They weren't necessarily customer facing. Customer doesn't care what phone system you use as long as the phone number is accessible to them. They email your support desk. As long as the email gets it, doesn't matter whether you're using Zendesk, Freshdesk, Salesforce, whatever. With AI technologies, these things are more and more customer facing. They change the way you search a knowledge base. They change the way you interact with a brand. So you need to be much more considerate about what is the experience I want to convey. In some parts of Europe, you have to tell people that you're talking to a bot. Is that something that you're willing to do? Does that hurt your brand to your demographic? Who is using your brand? If you're working with generations, millennials or younger, you might want to have a very app-based brand that contains everything you want. It's all personalized, all that information. Whereas if you're working with millennials and older, there might be a different consideration there depending on who you're selling to and why you're selling. The healthcare market is interesting. I did a lot of work at my last BPO that I worked in the healthcare industry and the empathy side of it. How much can you automate empathy? Not much. And so you need to consider that. It looks flashy and it sounds amazing that, hey, we can deflect stuff, we can save money, all those things that businesses love. But you have to really think about the impact to who you're selling to.
The picture that you're painting for me is that it used to be a very simple puzzle with pieces that you would just put together. But what I think you're saying here today is that you have to define the experience and the value that you want to provide, both externally and internally, and then design the system to your particular needs. That's a very different approach to creating a tech stack. And it sounds a bit more overwhelming because it puts a lot more onus on us versus, oh, I just got to, what VOP system that do I need? I'm going to look at 3 or 4 at the top and make a decision to move on. Because the technology and the AI drives experience and drives value. If you're consulting with a client, what's the first step that you would have them do, have them think through in order to be prepared to go out into the market and then search vendors, search partners that could help them put this tech stack together?
I always start by helping them decipher their priorities. So, for example, I'm working with a company, a smaller company called Truco now that's a QA tool, not an automated QA tool. And I sat down and I asked them, I said, what are your priorities? And they said, one of the hardest things we have is to get across our ROI. How do we tell people what our return investment is by automating their QA? You start breaking that down into chunks of problems. What's your value? Your value is that you can QA 100% of tickets versus manually, you could probably get 10 to 20%. There's a huge value right there. So, how do you advertise that in a way that sounds appealing, even if the cost of your tool might be slightly more than the manual cost? But hey, you're getting so much more out of it. And what's the value of that QA? How can you improve your customer experience? And you start to ask a lot of questions about where things break down. And the second thing I go to is what are your existing processes? How do you operate today? So I do a lot of shadowing with my clients. I watch what their agents do. I listen to sales calls. I hear what the objections are from the people they're trying to sell to. I hear what their customers are frustrated with. I watch what their agents struggle with. It's amazing A friend of mine who used to run the success operations team at a large company that did development software for developers, he always talked about counting clicks. And I love that mentality of watching someone and count the clicks. And you will be surprised at how many clicks something as simple as processing a refund is in the e-commerce space, because you have to click and find the order number. And sometimes that's multiple clicks because you have to copy the order number to another tool, then click search, then find the right order in the list, click on that. Then maybe there's a click in the tool because the UI is bad where you have to go to the payment method they use. And then you have to go to Stripe and open that window and click. And automation can start to reduce that. Again, another one of the clients I work with, Codif, that's what they do. They are able to connect to those systems and say, right up front to the agent, here's what we think we're trying to do this. We recognize using AI, this is what you're trying to do. You're going to refund this person, and here's what we think the refund process should look like. We're going to email this email that we generated to the customer. We're going to go and we're going to refund this order. We're going to send out a UPS shipment label so they can return it to you, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then all the agents do is look at it and say, yep, that's what I want to do. Click. And you've reduced 6, 7 minutes of clicking to 1 or 2 clicks in the middle. Those are very powerful changes to your agents. And if that's a priority to make your agents more effective, that may not be as super visible to your clients, your customers. Your agents' lives are a lot easier. There's less clicks, there's less manual intervention, which means there's less chance for copy and paste errors. Those are important things to companies. I sit and I watch and I shadow and see where are these long processes that are just constantly repeated day over day, ticket over ticket. And that's true in sales. I do a lot of support examples. That's my background, but this is true in sales calls. How many times have you answered the same objections in a sales call? Why not have that information readily available in some meaningful way ahead of the sales call? Educate your customers. Maybe do have your 60-second, 90-second demo on your website that answers some of these key questions for your clients before you get on a call and the communication is lopsided. You're trying to articulate that as an expert to someone who has no knowledge about anything you're talking about, or maybe doesn't even know the terms you're talking. Those are things that I think can be improved. And so that's where I start when it comes to consulting on tech stack is where are your priorities and where are your inefficiencies in the various processes you put in?
We talked a lot about AI. We talked about how AI is changing fundamentally the way that we buy in the tech stack. What are some of the challenges and the complications that AI also introduces into the tech stack and what you're trying to get done?
I think it's really interesting to understand that AI today, what we're calling AI today, is not truly artificial intelligence. The idea of artificial intelligence doesn't exist yet today. Artificial intelligence really means being creative, generating new ideas. Our current AI does not do that. The most advanced AI models are these large language models that we hear about: ChatGPT, Llama, Gemini is the Google one. These are the large language models that we start to hear about. And really, what they are really good at is predicting what the next thing is. So if I give it a prompt, it can predict what the sentence that answers that prompt looks like. That's why they're pretty good at code, because when I say, and I just did this earlier today for a client, I described what a web page should look like that solved a problem for them, and it generated the JavaScript and HTML code because it's fairly obvious in language that's logically structured what the next thing is. With English, it's not always on. And because these are not creative bots, these are not creative things, they have to be trained on everything that we want the bot to know. And so the problems that are introduced is when the models are too generic. We see this with examples. Recently, Chevrolet, someone social engineered the bot to sell them a car for $1. Air Canada, I'm based in Canada. Air Canada just had a problem where the bot made up a bereavement fare policy that didn't exist, and the courts held Air Candidates to adhere to that policy. And the reason is because those bots were not constrained enough and they weren't trained properly enough. In all those cases, these are called hallucinations where it makes something up or it does something that's unexpected. And some of them are not catchable because these things, again, have a bit of a mind of their own. It's not really understood how they get to certain answers. So when it comes to what they're not good at, is they're not good at answering kind of these questions that are broader and less specific, unless you have really constrained the model to be like, this is the domain of your knowledge. and a broad question possibly can be answered within that domain. And all they are really good at answering questions where there is a very clear answer. For example, do you ship to Texas? Yes or no? And I've worked with companies where, for example, they'll have a web page that has the shipping policy, and it will say something like, we ship through all US states except Alaska, something like that. And the bots are smart enough to read that sentence and understand that means Texas is included. Now, a better way to train it might be to be a very exhaustive list and list every single state. That might be a better way to train the bot. But bots are generally smart enough to get those kind of nuances in your hours, your company values. I think that in the future, every web page is going to have a bot that changes the way we navigate the web, as opposed to now having menus and drop downs and try to find the contact us page or trying to find the company history page. There's just going to be a bot. You're going to have a home page and a bot, and you just say, tell me about your company history. And it will tell you right there and then. You don't have to find it in the site navigation. I think that's coming in the near future. It's really good at things like that that have definitive answers. It's not good necessarily at empathy. It certainly is not good with sarcasm. Those are ways of communicating that we as humans have evolved. And in fact, I'd argue in my travels, empathy in Asia is very different than empathy in North America. To some degree, it's even different in Europe, but there's also different nuances between any sort of culture within subsegment of culture. So that's what they're not good at, because it's hard to train someone on sarcasm because it's a tone thing that we do with our voice. And so that's where you start to break down. And I would argue that you need to take those things into consideration when you're implementing any of this stuff, is because you have to know what you want the bot to say and do, and you have to know what you shouldn't say and do. One of the first things I do with every bot I encounter when I'm doing testing for clients is ask it, "Well, how big is the moon?" Because if it answers that question, if it answers how big is the moon, then it's not constrained enough. It should tell me, I'm not trained to know this. I don't understand your question. That's out of the scope of my knowledge. It should tell me that. But if it doesn't, then I know your bot isn't constrained enough. You haven't trained it down to the subset that you needed to.
Interesting. You've done a really good job of talking about how just approaching our tech stack has fundamentally changed, the impact of the front end customer and the experience on the back end analytics, the challenges of AI and the technology. But now, here's my question. We got to go through this consideration and sales process. We got to put something together.
Yeah.
What are the ways to navigate through this as somebody that doesn't have the experience level that you do?
It's really interesting. I actually think this is going to change the way we buy software. I really truly believe that. I was talking to a gentleman earlier this week who runs a company who does nothing but consult on IT infrastructure and software. And I told him a little bit about what I do. And one of the things that we both picked up on immediately was there's a trend here in the AI industry that you might need someone like this person for AI software. Big companies go to him and say, I don't know what the best IT infrastructure looks like. I don't know what software stack we should have to run this very complex network configuration, security, all that stuff that's very complex. You go out, we're going to give you a set of use cases, and you tell us what the tech stack is. He gets paid by referral fees, and the software company obviously gets paid with a new customer. I think you're going to start seeing this in the AI world because the world is just very complex. So I think that's coming. I don't advocate necessarily for that immediately, but step one is don't rely on Google like you used to. Full stop. Do not go to Google and say best conversational AI tool, best workflow automation tool, best agent assist tool. That's not going to work. What you really need to do is start to think about your use cases very specifically. So, for example, I want to deflect customer facing requests for refunds in an e-commerce company. Search that, and that will give you a better sense of what tools might help you there. So be very specific with your use cases is number one. Number two, I think, is when you're talking to potential clients and you hear things like, oh, it works out of the box, or oh, it's low code, or our models can cover all these use cases. They exaggerate, don't believe them. AI is not magic. It is absolutely not magic. There is absolutely a maintenance cost to this. And that maintenance cost might be hidden. It might be something that your senior people in your team can already do. You might have that skill set. Or it might be you need to hire a full time AI administrator. could be anything in that range, but there is a maintenance cost. When you're having these conversations, you also need to see demos on real data. If you're a company out there that sells AI and you're listening to this and you do not allow your customers to test a small subset of their data inside your system, I think you're going to fail because the data sets are so diverse and your mocked up setting that every company likes to demo and it seems like a hummingbird, that's not going to work. You have mocked that up and the customers are going to get to know that. And when they go and implement it and it's more difficult and it doesn't work as smoothly, that's a bad customer experience and you're going to see churn in. I have seen that happen. I've seen vendors come in and wow their clients, go to the implementation stage, and a month later, it's no. Now you've wasted the time, the money, the effort, and you feel like that person's ever going to talk to you again as a client. Going back to your question about how do you buy software, use case, lots of questions about how the model is trained, how the model is maintained. I think the third one that I'll throw in here is you need to clean your own house up first, because if your data is messy, then the AI will absolutely not be able to make sense of. So when you're going to buy it, if you're going to do what I say and test, do a proof of concept or test your data with a system, make sure your data is clean. The knowledge base, for example, do you ship to Texas? What if I typed in, do you ship to Germany? And the only thing in your article says we ship to the United States except Alaska. There is an ambiguity there. As a human, and you as a human might not think that's ambiguous because it's explicitly left out, so we can assume you don't ship to Germany. But the AI might interpret that different, depending on how the model is. Maybe one extra sentence. We only ship to North American clients or to the United American clients. That's getting your data in order, and you are going to have to do a data exercise as part of any implementation. Those are three things I would say when you're going through the buying cycle.
Can you tell us any of the customer stories, people you worked with that have gone through this evaluation process, that the steps that you just went through there, that we can learn from?
I think my favorite one is the refund use case that I already used earlier. One of my clients was a food delivery company in the California, and they, using a process similar to what I just talked to, workflow automation tooling, were able to reduce their refund processes from 8 minutes to 1 minute by using automation. And this did it all. It did exactly what I said earlier in the chat. This is what I want to do. And the agent could sit there and say yes or no. The good thing about stuff like that is you can start to make it customer facing. Obviously, you need some checks and balances. And that's what they're working on. The next is, well, how can the refund just be a self-service practice? That I think is really interesting. Be able to go through and navigate an entire refund process on your own. Uber Eats does that already, which is interesting. But this is a tech stack conversation, and I want to also be clear that you don't always need AI for interesting things. For example, I was at a company, one of my biggest accomplishments, two different companies, had to do with being proactive on things. So one was at a company where my team helped develop a support tool where a customer would call in and they would send us a set of details of their instance. And we fed this into a program that had a rule set backing it. This was not AI. This was purely pattern recognition. And it would parse all of your data to do with your server instance of this software product. And it would generate a report of, by priority, critical, high, need to look at type things, of the top 125 tickets that were known to exist. Talk about proactive support. When a customer calls in and says, I have this small problem, and you can go back and say, okay, I can help you solve this problem, but also here is a set of other problems that we have that you might encounter or might already be happening. You just haven't recognized it yet. And by the way, each of those links to an article on how to solve it, and you hand it to them. That was a cool little tool. That company has actually turned that tool into a full-fledged product as part of their support organization now, which I think is a huge accomplishment and an amazing tool that saves a ton of time, provides an awesome customer experience. And similarly, at another company, we did this using simple database queries. We had a scenario where customers were running into some problems. And so I worked with the development operations team who could parse the database. And when customers did certain actions within the tool, email those customers and say, hey, you did this thing that you might be uncertain about. We don't know if this is going to work out for you. Do you want to undo this before it causes a problem? And the great news is AI is better at that. And so when I'm going into tech stack conversations, there are tools that do everything I just said already. And there's tools that you can start to integrate into your stack to make your customers more effective, your agents more effective. And I love anything that has to do with providing more value with less friction. Those are the customer stories that I think are the most successful. I just want to be clear in this section when we're talking about the fact that it doesn't have to be AI. It just has to be, am I giving that value faster?
Craig, we've talked about so much here. If there was one thing that you wanted the CX leaders that are listening in, viewing today, you wanted them to take away from the podcast, what would that be?
Aside from the value stuff that I've hammered home several times, I think the biggest thing that I would like to say is this is not going away. And as a CX leader, you need to start thinking about how does this work with my current system? Or how do I adjust my systems to make it work for me? It's not about should I do it now or should I not do it now? It's not you should do it now. It's just a matter of what do you want, taking the time to think about it and figure out what fits with you and what you might need to do internally to get something to fit for you. I think that's the single biggest thing because this market is flooded with tools. A lot of those tools are going to die. I was talking to a leader earlier about this. Some of these AI tools are going to not be in the market a year from now. And so the key is to find the right partners, the people who are doing this the best, and the people that are selling the products that are going to improve your customer experiences across your customer journey. And start that investigation now because if you wait a year, you're going to be behind. And in this fast-paced world we're in where we're seeing evolutions in this every 6 months, we're seeming to get a new release of these models, Llama, Gemini, GPT. Being behind in this is going to be bad for business in the long term.
Great words of wisdom. I know there's going to be people that have questions. Would it be appropriate that we provided a link to your profile on LinkedIn?
Yeah, I'm Craig Stoss on LinkedIn. I'm also available at stoss.ca. Please feel free to reach out to me. I love having these conversations.
Fantastic. Thank you for coming in and bridging the gap between what we used to think of in terms of a tech stack and how do we even approach buying that. And then just a very specialized place. One of my big takeaways was when you talked about don't just Google X, like Google specific to your industry, specific to your use case, and get companies that have solved that in particular, and then evaluate, ask questions. You'll learn a ton. That's one of my biggest takeaways here. So thank you for everything you shared with us today.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Steve, for having me.